Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Makiba and I'm delighted to be your host tonight. I'm joined tonight by Evan and Warwick, who will be your presenters. Evan is LongView's co-founder and executive chair. He is a data-driven property mythbuster who is convinced that the conventional wisdom around property is often misleading. Warwick is our head of professional buying. He's purchased over 1,000 properties for clients over his career and has even taken home the REIV Buyer's Agent of the Year award. For those who aren't familiar with LongView, we're a leading property firm working to transform the Australian property landscape. We do so by making home ownership more accessible, empowering buyers with expertise, and improving the renting experience for both landlords and tenants. I'll quickly go through how tonight's event will run, and then I'll pass you over to the experts. Firstly, we'll be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar, so if you have any questions, please send them through. You can send these privately or publicly. We may not answer them right away, but we have a dedicated time at the end of the session to get through as many as we can. If you have a more personal question or one that requires a more in-depth conversation, you'll also have the opportunity to book a one-on-one consultation with our experts. To start the night off, in order to get to know you all a little bit more, we would like to ask you a quick question. So we were wondering, what are your main concerns about the current property market? You can answer this question on the poll below, and we should see a live answer of the results appearing. Beautiful. So I can see that we've got a lot of people who are looking to buy and wondering if this is the right time. So we'll make sure to, keep everything relevant and keep that in mind as we go through tonight's event. And now I'd like to welcome Evan and pass over to you.
Thanks very much, Makiba, and everyone. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to start with a few screaming headlines because I know that many of you are seeing a lot of screaming headlines in newspapers and online and on TV about the property market crash. And that naturally and quite rightly is concerning a lot of people about whether or not they should buy a property, whether they should buy now, whether they should buy later, whether they should have bought earlier or not. A lot of questions about when's the right time. Personally, I think that's the wrong question, and we'll talk about that tonight. But, here's an interesting comparison. Here's a few screaming headlines. These are actually from the Australian Financial Review. So, a serious newspaper that's meant to give balanced, thoughtful commentary on matters of finance and economics. And yet, if you do a Google search, even on the Fin Review, let alone less credible journals, with the words housing crash or property crash, you'll see thousands and thousands of entries. Almost, some almost every year. And yet, when I hear people say, I think we've had another bubble, we're heading for another crash, I ask a simple question. When was the last time the Australian housing market crashed? There is an answer to that. It's 1893. Now, while I make that point, I don't mean to say that there aren't times when average house prices do go down, because they do. Not usually by a huge amount, but it happens. But I think all the language about crash is stock market language, not property market. Actually, the reason why many of you are interested in buying property is precisely because property is a lot more stable than the share market. Timing can matter in the share market. If I can buy a certain company for $100 a share today and the share market crashes, which it does every 10 or 15 years, and I could buy it 3 months from now for $50, then I'd sure feel bad about buying it for $100. But that's actually not how the property market works. The most the Australian property market has ever gone down is 12% over a slow 2-year period. But unless you were going to buy at the top and sell 2 years later for 12% less, and that would be a silly thing to do because the stamp duty alone would make that a dumb thing to do, that's not actually relevant. So, here's the a map of the average property price over the last 12 years. It's been mainly going up, about 7% per annum. It's roughly doubled every 10 years. It's been doing that since before any of us were born. So the property market is not the share market. It's much more stable and it's much less prone to crash at any time. But that doesn't mean prices don't go down. But I want to share a little bit more detail. Let's look at these are Melbourne house prices over the last 35 years. You can see the line wobbles around a bit, particularly if you take the short view, the last 3 or 4 years. The market was a little bit above its long-term trend in 2017. Then it went down a bit by the election in 2019. It was a little bit below its long-term trend. Then we've had this massive uplift that, have made many homeowners happy. But that's actually got it roughly back to its long-term trend. It's now likely to be coming down a bit. I'm not in the business of predicting what the property market will do in the next 6 months because it's not actually important to do so. But what I can tell you is that crash is not a particularly useful way of describing what happens. This is the housing market average. But here's the thing, you don't buy the average, you buy a property. And so you might think that, for example, if you bought a property in 2011, where that first dot is, and you sold it in 2021, the housing market average has roughly doubled. So you would have doubled your money, right? No. If you bought the housing market average, that might be true, but there is no such thing. You can't buy that. You can only buy an actual property. And it turns out that those averages that are there are made up of some properties that do really well and some properties that do really badly. And so really the main message from us tonight is not about timing. It's not this is a good time or a bad time to buy. Real estate sales agents are always trying to tell you today's a great time to sell because they want to make money doing that. We're not here to tell you what the right time to buy is. What we think is much more important is what's the right property to buy. That's a much more important question than when should I buy it. And let me illustrate that. Let's take this period, 2011 to 2021, when the average price doubled. But you can do thousands of these. This is a random sample of 4 properties that were all bought in 2011 and all sold in 2021 when the average doubled. But these properties aren't average. The first property, not only did it not double in 10 years, it went backwards over that period. I see these heartbreaking stories all the time. Many of our landlords, for example, bought off-the-plan apartments from clever developers who convinced them that it was property, nothing could ever go wrong. And not only did they not make money, they lost money over that period, as the buyer, unfortunately, of this property did. By the same token, all 4 of these properties, by the way, were bought at exactly the same price in 2011, about $400,000, every one of them. And yet, 10 years later, when they were sold, you can see the property bottom right in Heathmont, sold for over nearly $1.2 million 10 years later. It almost tripled in price. So huge differences in individual properties, and you only buy individual properties. You don't buy the average. So it really matters what you buy, not when you bought it. You could have bought that apartment in Docklands in 2009, 2010, 2015. Frankly, it wouldn't matter when you bought it. It would have been a terrible investment. So what matters is what you buy much more than when you buy it. And I want to give you some background on how we analyse these things. And you'll forgive me, this is a very complicated chart, but I'm just trying to sort of share how we approach this question. We've analysed every sale price of every property in Australia for 50 years. I can give you the names and addresses of every property that's ever been sold at a loss, and you can see which properties have made how much capital gain over how long. So you'll forgive the graph if you can't follow it. This is a random sample of 5,000 properties in Melbourne we just pulled out over the last 40 years. And what was the average growth in their price? So the dotted line is actually for 7% per annum, which means it doubles every 10 years, which is about the average. And so you can see that line roughly runs through the middle of all those dots. The average goes about 7% per year, which means it doubles every 10 years. But the individual properties, as you can see from these dots, can be way above or way below average. So the key thing is which are the properties that are going to at least do that average, 7% per annum doubling in 10 years. That's actually pretty good, right? And about half properties will do even better than that. So how do you make sure you buy those ones? We've done thousands of hours of data science. You'll meet Warwick in a minute, and he leads our buying advisory team. Warwick's bought over 1,000 properties over the last 20 years. Both our personal experience of buying properties and everything the data science tells us, I'm going to summarize in about 2 minutes. Of course, it's a bit more complicated than that, but we're trying to make it simple so that you can have at least a core understanding of what makes a good property investment versus a bad one, and understand that given that that's the case, the main question is not when did I buy it? The main question is what did I buy? So we've created a word we call SODWELL, solid older dwellings on well-located land. Why are we using that description? Well, let me explain something very fundamental about property. Many of you already know, but sometimes people forget. The value of land keeps going up. The value of any building on that land gradually depreciates. It gets older. A beautiful new Miele kitchen is not so beautiful 10 years later, right? A beautiful new building is a bit worn out and the roof's not so good 20 years later. So the value of land goes up, the value of the buildings on the land go down. And so the properties that have the best growth rate are the ones where the value of the land is most of what you bought, because the money that you spent that went into the land is going to go up in value. The money that you spent that went into the building is going to go down in value. And so that's why we suggest you buy solid older dwellings on well-located land. Of course, there's no point in buying a property either to live in or to rent out if the house is no good or the property is no good for people to live in. That's not any good for anyone. But if you're doing it as an investment, particularly in Australia, where capital growth is really strong but rental yields are really poor, then you've got to focus on getting capital growth. To get capital growth, you've got to buy properties that have what we call good land content, where most of the money is used to buy the value of the land underneath the property. Now, so the way I look at property investing, most of the money is in the land, most of the problems are in the building. So you don't just need to buy solid older dwellings on well-located land, you need to buy the right solid older dwelling on well-located land, or you're buying yourself a nightmare, either to live in or to rent out to tenants. And every property is different. That's why you cannot sit on a beanbag in Richmond and be a tech entrepreneur and say, we know how to buy property well, we've looked at all the data. You've got to be out on the ground. You've got to be what we call in the field. You've got to visit every property. You've got to think about who's going to live here. Is this the right match for the family that's buying it, or is this going to be a sensible property to rent? So you've got to get a combination of what the data science tells you and then what field experience tells you, and then hand-to-hand combat with the sales agents and the negotiation to get the right price. So there's 3 example properties here out of the 5,000 that give you a sense of which are the types of properties. The property on the right went up 6 times in value over the 20 years that the owner owned it. The property top left went up 2.5 times in just 7 years. You'll notice they're solid older dwellings on well-located land. The new build apartment in Armadale, bottom left, went down 10% per annum for 10 years. A disaster. That owner lost a fortune. So while the property market is actually very stable, and even when it crashes, it goes down by a relatively small amount, that in a sense doesn't help you because you don't buy the market. You buy individual properties. So my summary for those of you who are concerned about, gee, I don't want to make a mistake, and that's a right concern. Investing in property is serious. I sometimes say it's a little bit like a marriage. You're in it for the long term and it's awfully expensive to get out of. So you want to make sure you made the right decision. And you want to make sure that you're diligent and thoughtful about making any property purchase decision, whether as your home or as an investment, no matter where the property market is at. No matter whether there's screaming headlines of boom or screaming headlines of crash, the truth is the market's actually pretty stable despite all of that, but you don't buy the market, you buy an individual property. So if you are worried about making a mistake, as you should be, let me tell you how to make every mistake in the book, and sadly some people do, and then how to avoid making those mistakes, broadly speaking. So firstly, Australia is one of the best capital growth markets in the world. The value of well-bought property goes up quickly, but unfortunately that means almost by definition, the rental yields in residential property are low. So trying to focus on getting the most rent out of the property is unlikely to end up being a good investment for you. And so that's challenging. In other countries, particularly large parts of the US and elsewhere, you can get very good rental yields and make really good money just out of the rent alone, but in Australia that's rare. You tend to make good money by the increase in the value of the property. I have a particular thing about off-the-plan apartments, and my property developer friends will forgive me. These are almost always sold for more than what they're worth. And then, we have these heartbreaking conversations with our landlord clients all the time when they bought a nice, pretty new apartment with a European kitchen and fancy marketing and all that sort of stuff. And they come to us years later and say, I'm not sure this is doing as well as I thought. Can you tell us what it's worth? And we say, sure. And often it's the same or less than what they paid for it. And they look sort of disappointed. And they say, well, but I thought the property market had gone up. And we say, it has, but not for you. So why? Because almost all of your money went into a building and hardly any of it went into the land in for example, a new build apartment. So there's a lot of, if you want to lose money, that's not a bad way of doing it, unfortunately. And focusing too much on how much rent you can get out and not enough on the capital growth, generally speaking, it might be a relatively safe way to buy property, but you're unlikely to make much money. One of the main ways you can lose money in property, apart from really buying the wrong property, is if you get out of whack with the way you finance the property. If you did stretch yourself too far, borrow too much money from the bank, and then interest rates go up, it's hard to pay the bank back. Worst case, ultimately, the bank forces you to sell the property at the worst possible time. You really can lose money if you do that. So the most important thing is to buy a property that's going to go up in value, a solid older dwelling on well-located land. And the second important thing is to make sure that you financed it in a way where you are in control of your destiny, not your bank. Because unfortunately, if they're going to cause you trouble, they're going to cause you trouble at the worst possible time. And sadly, we'll start seeing a little bit of that, and there will be a number of folks who are forced to sell properties by their banks, particularly as the interest rates rise in the next while, and who may well lose money as a result. So that's a really important part. And so if you don't get forced to sell, then for goodness sake, don't panic and sell when you see the prices going down for a little while. Focus on buying the right property, hold it for the long term, and you'll do well. So on the right-hand side here, how do I invest in property and make sure I make money? Firstly, buy the right solid older dwelling on well-located land. And I suspect a lot of you are saying, well, Evan, that's great, but I can't afford to buy a standalone house, even in the outer suburbs. Doesn't have to be a house. We buy a lot of villa units for our clients, for example. You might have 3 villa units on a standard suburban block. Quite a lot of the cost of that villa unit, particularly one that might be 20 or 25 years old and well built, will be the value of the land underneath it. Some have, sometimes a lot of townhouses have quite a lot of the value in the land that they sit on. Even some apartments in small blocks do. An apartment in a block of 200, almost no chance that there's any real land value in that, and therefore very little chance you'll get much capital growth, if any. So buy the right solid older dwelling on well-located land. Your budget will just help to indicate which locations might be the right place to buy it. Maybe if your budget is low, you might be better off buying in a regional city, something like that, or buying a villa unit rather than a house. But the focus is buying the right, not the wrong ones. You need to, each individual house is different. Don't buy some tumble down thing that's going to be a nightmare either to live in or to rent out. Buy the right solid older dwelling on well-located land. Part of that is then also understanding what the opportunities are for the value of that to grow, either by things you do. For example, you might be able to buy a property which is big enough to subdivide in future, or that some developer might want to buy in future and do more development on, so the value of the land will go up. Thirdly, as I mentioned before, very important that you finance the property correctly. We're not financial advisors, we're property advisors. Always happy to refer you to good, trustable financial advisors that we know, if you don't have one of your own, but making sure that you don't overstretch yourself in buying the property, but also don't understretch. The money from the bank is cheap. If you're buying the right asset and you can afford to pay the bank back, then you'll get all of the value uplift and just have to pay the bank back the same amount. So getting the right mix of the bank's money and your money to make sure you can make as much money out of the bank's money as possible, but not so greedy that you can't afford to pay the bank back, especially when prices go up. So you'll forgive me, there is a little bit of a commercial element to what we're saying here. There's a reason we have professional buyers advisors at LongView. There's a reason we have a data science team. And that is that, you know, the difference between buying well and not buying well is typically about $500,000 over the next 10 years. You saw that with the 4 case studies I gave you. So we think it's sad that most people make the biggest financial decisions of their lives, the properties they buy for both their home and or as investment properties, usually without any professional assistance. So most people think it's okay, I can do it myself. I bought stuff before, and I'm sure you can. You probably can't do it as well as someone who's bought 1,000 properties, just generally speaking. And you probably don't know as much as a data science team that's analysed every sale property of every sale price of every property in Australia for 50 years. So it's a serious decision. You don't want to make a mistake. You'll be stuck with what you've got for a long time. So get help, make that decision well, and then you can rest easy and let the value of that property, particularly the land underneath that property, bring you the wealth that you're looking for over the longer term. So I talk a bit theoretically. You see lots of dots on a page and lots of, you know, I'm an old Silicon Valley guy. I'm a data hound. My colleague Warwick Brookes has bought over 1,000 properties. There's a lot of practical, streetwise experience that comes in that, both in helping families choose the home that will actually be right for them, because oftentimes people actually think they know what's going to work for them, but if you've seen it 1,000 times, you've seen where people make mistakes, and you start getting some pattern recognition about that, as well as all the practical stuff about how to deal with sales agents who are almost certainly lying to you, and a whole bunch of the other, you know, hand-to-hand combat that is involved in trying to negotiate the best price on a property. So over to you, Warwick, and you'll talk about the practical ways that you can buy the right property in the right way.
Thanks, Evan. Just before we do pass back over to Warwick, we thought now would be a good time to address one of the many questions that we've had come through on the chat. So we've actually got Kate here asking, is now the right time to buy an investment property with the interest prices going up?
Yeah, so I'll say again, the most important thing is to buy the right investment property and to make sure you can do it in a way that you can afford it. So you should assume that the interest rates are going to go up, and hopefully if you're dealing with a responsible bank or mortgage broker, they'll be factoring that in to make sure that you have capacity to pay the interest rates if they do go up. Interest rates will go up and down. It's rare that it makes sense to buy a property without the intention of owning it for at least 7 years, often 10 or more. And over that time, you should assume that interest rates will go up and down. So you need to be able to buy a property that you can afford and to borrow only as much money as you can afford to cover the interest costs on. Obviously, the rent will help offset some or all of that. But if you're going to take all that risk about rising interest rates, then let's make sure you do it for a good property. The most important thing is that you buy the right property and that you finance it in a way where you're never forced to sell it.
Thanks, Evan. And just a reminder that we will get to some of the other questions in the chat at the end of the session. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Warwick, who's going to speak a little bit about how professional buyers can help clients.
Thanks, Makiba. Tonight, what I'll be talking about is essentially how the in-field team, my guys who are out there fighting and going through and dealing with agents and doing all these things to find the best properties for our clients, work with the data science team. And I'll be going through some of the experiences that we go through, some of the things that we've seen, giving you some ideas about some things that you may not have thought about. And also, I'll give you a little bit of a glimpse of the technology that we get to use here. And we will also have a little bit of a snapshot of some new technology that is in development that is going to be released very soon. It's super exciting. But yeah, so now we'll just jump right into it. So essentially, the first kind of question people kind of go is, everybody says, how do you find the right property? And the biggest thing for that for people, I suppose, is what is good and what is bad. And if you look at what Evan just spoke about, it's really hard because I suppose our biggest competitor, essentially, your friends at a barbecue. So you go to a barbecue, you say, oh, I'm looking to buy a property, and somebody there tells you, oh, this area is doing awesome, it's got all this great stuff, or they read an article in a paper saying that the prices are going up here, and you go, great, that sounds awesome, and you start looking in that area. They're not talking about specific properties in an area or anything. They're just saying that's working. They may not even know that article may not have even been correct. And a lot of those articles, especially in the property magazines, are funded by developers. So a lot of the data and so forth in those magazines, it just isn't correct. So for us, it's about kind of making people understand, and what we saw earlier with Evan, is what really is the right property to buy. And then once you find out what the right property is to buy, it's kind of like, how do you kind of do it? And there are two markets, essentially. There's on market, which is when you jump on your computer and you're on realestate.com or domain.com.au and you're searching away and you can see all these properties come up. That's one part of the market. There's another part of the market, which is what is referred to as off market. And this would constitute, I mean, even if we go off the statistics of what we do, we purchase around 25% of properties for our clients off market. Now, when I'm saying that these properties are off market, these are properties that a vendor has gone to a real estate agent and said, I don't want to pay marketing. So you can sell my property to your database, or they might want to have a quiet sale. They don't want people to know about it. There's a variety of different reasons why people don't want to have their property listed online. Now, getting access to these properties and knowing when these properties come up is really a bit of a shot in the dark. And our guys are on the phones every week, calling all the agents, seeing what's coming up, what's out there. So the thing to take away from this is that when you are looking for these right properties, and the thing also is, at the whole market, there's a small percentage that are going to perform exceptionally well. And we can go through all this data, and Evan can show you all these dots and everything else, and that will just make it super confusing. But at the end of the day, the ones that work are a small percentage, and what we do is help you find those ones. And we do it by on-market and off-market. So what you kind of really do need to take away from this perspective is that there's a huge market out there, and it's super confusing. Now, what I'm going to go through next, essentially, is a few of the common mistakes we see. Now, there are a lot of them out there, but the ones that we kind of, for this presentation tonight, we've kind of gone for 3 of them. Now, the first one, and probably the most important one, is people overpaying. So when you look at a property online and you're given a quote range, a lot of people just assume that that's what the property's worth. Now, you might not actually know that the property isn't worth that. I got an email today, specifically today, from one of the girls in our office who's looking to buy a property. She sent me an email saying, hey, Warwick, do you mind just having a look at this property? We're thinking about putting an offer on it. It's been up for sale for a little bit of time, so we're not quite sure where to put an offer in. The property was advertised for 1.25 to 1.35. And she was saying, do you think we should put an offer in at 1.25? I jumped on and had a look through some of the data, looked at some recent comparables, looked at the different land sizes, different types of properties, and essentially found out that in reality, it was probably only worth maximum 1.1 million. So she might have, just without knowing, gone and offered 1.25. So from that perspective, I said, okay, let's put an offer of 1,020,000 in and see what they say. So it's not just because an agent puts a price on there, it doesn't mean that the property is worth that. So there is a lot of research around, because I suppose one perspective to look at from an agent is that a lot of the time when they put a price on a property, they're putting a price on that the owner is wanting for the property. It doesn't mean that that's what the property is worth. It's what the owner wants to get for it. So when you're looking at that price, it can sometimes, with really good properties, exceed that, and we have seen that in the market. But for other times, they sit there for a long time. And the ones that sit there for a long time sit there because they are overpriced and the owner's expectations are too high. So don't fall into that trap of kind of going, okay, well, if the agent's asking this and he's telling me it's a great property and he's giving me these comparables that show me that it's worth that that's actually the case. Because the thing with data and property data is it can be manipulated to kind of sway it in different ways. So they may show you one that's sold for a similar price, but if you actually drill down and go through the two properties, you can understand the difference in the prices. But just from saying, oh, that one sold for that, gives you the confidence to do that. And that's not always the way. So the other thing is, if you buy a property, and especially if you're investing, and you paid too much for it, so let's say you paid 10% too much for it in the marketplace. So let's say it's in market value is $1 million, and you pay 1.1 million. Automatically, you're starting off at $100,000 behind the market. So you've got to wait for that market to catch up to that 100,000 to get to 1.1. So instead of if you had bought a property for $1 million at a $1 million market value, the property price increases as the market goes up. But if you overpay for it, you've got to wait there and you get no increase in value of your property until the market catches up to the price you paid. So that's just where we get people come in and they say, oh, I bought a property 2 years ago or 3 years ago and it hasn't done anything, hasn't gone up in value. And it's a good property. And we look at it and say, okay, well, why is that? And we look at what they paid for it and we go, well, you paid way over the odds at the time. And this could be done, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but this can be done at bidding at an auction where you get caught up in the emotion of it all and you just kind of want to buy it. You need to buy these properties at fair market value. So that's a crucial part of the property journey, is not overpaying and understanding what is that actual property worth. The other thing that we do find for a lot of people is this about missing out. When I say missing out, that's where they miss out on buying properties in the marketplace. So you'd be amazed how many people come and see us because they've been looking for a year or 18 months and they haven't bought. And we go, wow, how's that possible? And they go, oh, I just haven't found the right property, or they've all been overpriced, or like it's kind of going too much, or and all these different things. But what's happening is that they don't have the confidence in what they're looking at to start to make that decision to push ahead and do something with it. So they might go look at it and go, oh, if I can get it for this price, I'll buy it. And they're way down on the odds, so they miss out. So they might have found the best property possible that is going to work great for them and do everything right, but because they don't have an understanding of its value, they undervalue it, and then when they go to buy it, somebody else pays a little bit more and they secure that property. I was at an auction and we bought this property for a client, and another one of our team members was there standing next to somebody. And this was pre-COVID. And the person that they were standing next to said to our team member, geez, they paid way too much for that property. And our team member thought, well, that was an interesting thing to say. We bought it at what we believed was the fair market value, but this person was obviously felt that it was worth less. That property is probably worth $150,000 more since COVID. So it is kind of understanding and having that confidence in the getting the advice so that you know that you can buy. The other fun we have is panic buying. Now, panic buying is where people make mistakes in real estate. Now, there's two main panic buying criteria. So panic buying is where the market's rising and you go, I've got to get in. And you're just kind of just searching, and you're missing out here, you're missing out there, and you just go, I just got to buy something, and you just buy it. And that could be, and it's a hit and miss. It could be good, it could be bad, because you're just trying to get into that market. Now, that's a really bad strategy, obviously, but it's also kind of, you need to understand that if you're kind of jumping in and just wanting to rush in and get into a rising market, the chances of you buying something that won't work for you is higher than buying something that will work for you. So having a sounding board and somebody there to kind of pull you back and say, okay, let's make a strategy around this and let's do this properly, can make a big difference. Another panic buying we see, especially for homeowners, is where they've gone to an auction and they've found this house that they love, they're bidding, and then they miss out and they're devastated. And the agent comes up to them and says, I've got a property around the corner that I think you'll love. And they just want to buy. They're in that mode. They had the check in their pocket and they just want to do it. And the agent takes them around the corner, shows them this property. It may not suit them perfectly, but they're so emotionally jacked up over what's just happened and they want to get into the market that they go, okay, they rush through in 5 to 10 minutes and then they get a call that afternoon, I've got another person who's going to make an offer on that property. If you're really interested, you've got to give me an offer. And then they go, yeah, okay, we do it. And this is where we see people come in to us 2 years down the track, maybe 3 years down the track, and say, oh, we're looking to kind of change our house and go to a different house. And I go, why are you doing this so quickly? Why you've only been in this house for 3 years? Oh, well, it just didn't end up suiting us. We didn't end up kind of it didn't work out for us. And that's kind of where they made that kind of quick decision because they wanted to get in the market and they were just looking to miss out. So overpaying, missing out and panic buying are definitely kind of three of our bigger places where people make mistakes. Now, my next slide here seems pretty obvious, but if you kind of listen to Evan, a lot of people don't do this. And as Evan said, one of the really bad or heartbreaking parts of my job is every week speaking to owners who have bought properties that are worth less than what they paid for them 10, 14 years ago. And they just say to me, I don't understand why. Why, when I was told this property was going to be great and go up in value, why is it now worth $50,000, $100,000 less than what I paid for it? And this is the ones where we're talking about off-the-plan properties and high-rise buildings, which Evan was talking about before. So ensuring capital growth, for an investor, it's just a no-brainer. That's what you want. Capital growth is where you build your wealth. But capital growth for a homeowner is different. Now, homeowners don't see capital growth as a main importance. What we come across a lot of the time is that they don't see it as a key factor in what they're looking for. They go, great if I get it, but I want to kind of get this type of house. Now, what a lot of guys, especially first homeowners, we try to explain to them is capital growth is what helps you get to the next stage. We kind of say it's like a stepping stone for you. So if you buy a property because it's a lifestyle property and you go, I'm not fussed about capital growth. I just want to live in it. I want it to be what I want. And when you go to buy the next property, which is a better property, your property has stayed here, but this property's here now, and the gap has got a lot bigger. So this is where the kind of capital growth and buying the wrong properties really does kind of bite you. So what we are there to do and what we do to help clients is talk to them through and make sure, and I'll show you in a sec how we do this because it's pretty cool, but make sure that when they buy a property, it's going to grow in value for them and it's going to work for them. It's going to work for them from either an investment where it's going up in value, or it's going to work for them from the perspective of it's going to help me get to the next phase of my property journey, or it's going to help you when you're at the end of your property journey to help you retire when you downsize. So capital growth is such a key element of everybody's wealth and everything to do with what we believe in property. But I'll go through some stuff about capital growth in a sec. Another part that we kind of go through is helping people manage their emotions. Now, I've talked a few things over overpaying, missing out, panic buying, all these different things, but essentially a big role that we play in the buying journey for people is, especially with couples, we're counsellors for them. Because a lot of time they're not on the same page. And it's really kind of helping them understand that when they're kind of, what they're trying to look for may not suit them now. So a great example for that is I have a young couple come to me. I mean, this happens all the time. So we have a young couple come in. Let's say they're kind of late 20s, early 30s, and they're kind of going, we want to buy our first kind of home. And they say to me, okay, I go, yep, okay, where do we want to be? They go, okay, let's go single fronter in Fitzroy North or Collingwood. And then I go, what about car parking? No, we're not fussed about car parking. We want to be close to cafes and do all that kind of stuff. And first question I ask them is, okay, when are you going to have kids? Probably, I don't know, next year, couple of years. Okay. And what's that 5 to 10 year look like for you? So then they start thinking, okay, well, that house may not suit me. Because if any of you, and lots of you probably who are watching may have kids, kids take a lot of space up, and they kind of, you need a lot more room. And not having car parking out for your house and having to lug a baby 200 metres down the street where you can get a car park, get into your house, it's just not that convenient. So it's really about kind of helping our kind of clients manage what they want to what's right for them. And once we kind of explain out these processes and go through these workshops, is going, okay, we're looking to buy, and Evan pointed out earlier, properties for the long term, and LongView is our name. But if you're looking short term, you're not going to make money out of real estate. So with this, what we're doing is we're kind of going, okay, what's that 10-year cycle look like? Because if you buy and it doesn't suit you and you need to sell in 2 or 3 years or even 4 years, as Evan said earlier, the stamp duty costs alone and then the selling agent's fees alone will be a huge impact of money that's just essentially thrown down the drain. So if you make that decision and get into the right location and suit you for a longer journey in property, then your capital growth and the compounding capital growth is really where it works, kind of has that effect that helps you get to that next stage. So the emotions and all that kind of stuff is a big part of it. And then dealing with the sales agents. For us, it's a business-to-business transaction. And when we're dealing with them, there's no emotion, it's just business to business. So they know us, we've been around for 20 plus years. They don't muck around with us, we don't muck around with them. And we can negotiate exceptionally well with them, and we know how far to push and all those things. I've just been told I need to speed up. So I'll go through a couple more things. I've got a bit to go through, not much time. Bidding and auction, another big one. I'll quickly run you through kind of how we do it. Once again, no emotion. So instead of you going to an auction and you're there nervous, watching the auctioneer, watching what's happening, we're the opposite. We're not nervous because we're spending your money. So it's fun for us. But we don't watch the auctioneer. We watch the crowd. We face the crowd. We watch who we're bidding against. We watch their emotions. We watch what they're doing, how they're talking to the partner. Are they running low on money? We're bidding without any emotion. So having a professional person bid for you does make a very big difference. And although this might take a bit of the gloss off it, you'd be amazed how many auctions we buy on our last bid. And the people who we're bidding against go, what's the point? These guys are going to keep bidding. So it does make a big difference. I'm going to quickly take you through some of the cool tech stuff that our guys do. So you guys, everybody has the portals of realestate.com and domain.com.au, and you can do the normal search stuff. We've had a system built for us called Artemis, and it lets us search criteria that is just way beyond all that. So I can actually jump on Artemis and I can say, I only want to see properties that have had capital growth between 7 and 10% for the last 20 years. And it just wipes everything else that's currently on live on the market that hasn't had that. So automatically my list of 6,000 properties goes down to 300. I can say, I only want north-facing backyard. And then my list drops again. I can say, I want to be in that school zone, or I want to be 500 metres from the train station. We can search by zoning. So we want specific zoning, or I just want a corner block. And our system goes through everything that's currently on the market live and just dissects it all and brings it down into a smaller pool. Now, where that is a big benefit to us and our clients is speed in market. Our ability to find the right properties and the great properties as soon as they hit the market is just so much faster than anyone else, I believe, in the marketplace. So that is kind of a cool little system, and we can take you through that in a lot more detail further down the track if you guys want to have a consultation. But lastly, I want to take you through something that we're building right now that is going to be really cool, and it's going to be released very soon. And this is we're calling it at the moment Brief Accelerator. So this is where you'll be able to put in, and this is free. You'll be able to put in the suburb you're looking for, or the school zone you want to be in, how many bedrooms, baths, and cars you want, what your budget is. Now, this system will automatically come up with all these cool little graphs. This is just on our slide here. It's just a little bit of an outline of it, but it will essentially show you how many properties were sold in the last 3 to 6 months that matched your brief, how many people matched your budget, and how many matched both. It will also then tell you what the median price of what your budget actually is. So let's say you've got your budget is $750,000, and you say, I want to live in this suburb, this many bedrooms, and I want to be in this school zone. This system will quickly just tell you either, yeah, you're right with your budget, or no, you actually need $850,000. So where this is going to really help people in the marketplace is where I was talking before that you're missing out of the market or you're getting your pricing wrong. So that will help you either kind of work out, okay, do I go back and get more money, or do I adjust? And you can adjust your brief on this thing, and it will tell you kind of what you need to be to kind of do that. So you can kind of go, okay, I'll move a suburb out. How does that change it? Or I'll change my budget price. How does that change it? And it will kind of all work it out for you. Nobody else is doing this, and it's really cool, and it's really cool to be a part of it. My time, I've got 30 seconds left. Cool. Evan said it before, it's the backbone of what we are, what we do. We've analysed every sale price of every property in Australia for the last 50 years. Our data science team, they work with us, the field guys. They ask us so many questions. They're building a system that's based off us and our knowledge to help you guys make the most out of your property journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Warwick. We have lots of really interesting questions coming through, but I would just like to remind everyone that if you do have a more in-depth or personalised question, we will invite you to book a one-on-one chat with one of our experts. So please use the link that's being posted in the chat now, or you can click the button on your screen. When you fill this form in, our professional buyers will contact you shortly, and in this consultation, you'll be able to explain what you're trying to achieve in your property journey and get clarity on how we can work hand in hand with you to get there. Okay, let's jump into the questions. So the first question that we have here is for Warwick, and we've got Patrick asking, what are the pros and cons of buying a house versus townhouse, high-rise versus low-rise apartments?
Okay, very good question. Kind of going back a bit earlier as to what Evan was talking about. Essentially, from what we've seen, the house, older dwelling on land is kind of your prime best case scenario. Then it kind of goes down. So land content is the key here. Townhouses. Now with townhouses, there is a bit of a funny thing with townhouses is townhouses is a bit about design and quality of build. So you've got to be a bit more careful when you're looking at townhouses. Apartments. Now high-rise apartments are just a no-go. I can just give you pages and pages of data of people who have lost money on that, and it's mind-blowing. If the media would publish the real stats, it's mind-blowing. Apartments in smaller blocks, especially Art Deco, old style ones. Art Deco's 1950s. They can work if you're in the right spot. So when I'm talking about the right spot, it's like not being in a street where it's all apartments. So where you're surrounded by nice houses, but you might only have one block or 2 blocks in the street. So there are kind of criteria around that. But to answer your question, houses are your number one, and then they kind of go backwards from there. But big thing to take away is never buy high rise.
Beautiful. We've got the $1 million question come through here. Where is the best suburb to buy in Melbourne?
I'll go that one as well. So essentially, that system I showed you before, where what we call Artemis, we don't need to know where the best suburb to buy in Melbourne is right now. This system analyses every single suburb in Melbourne, and it's live data. So we can tap in and say, I want to find, because there's no suburb that's doing best or not best. It's specific property. You can go to a street and I can show you properties that don't work in the street and properties that do work in the street in every suburb. So what it's about is finding the right properties in the marketplace. And what our system does is, by us being able to track capital growth and be able to track all these other bits and pieces that make a great property, means that I can get, and essentially if I go live on our system and I key in my perfect criteria, normally it comes down to about 40 properties, and we'll break that down to about 10. So, and they're all over. So it's about the property, it's not about the location.
Beautiful. All right, Evan, we've got a great question here from Jason for you. Are you better off selling an underperforming investment property to cut your losses so you can unlock capital to purchase a better / the right property?
Yeah, Jason, that's a great question. I'm just going to say something firstly on the question Warwick answered to, and then I'm going to answer Jason's question. I think one of our favourite slogans at LongView is you don't buy a suburb, you buy a property. And the people who are out selling suburbs are real estate sales agents because they work in a particular suburb, so they don't care what you buy as long as it's in their suburb because they're the ones who are selling it. And property developers who are there to sell their development, and they try and sell their development by saying it's in a great suburb. I can show you great properties and terrible properties in every suburb in Australia. I can show you great investment outcomes and terrible investment outcomes in every suburb in Australia. That doesn't mean the suburbs on average perform the same way. In the last 15 years, Brighton, a blue chip suburb, has done 6.1%, I think it is, compound annual growth, which is pretty good. But Glen Waverley, a middle ring suburb, has done 8.2%. The Glen Waverley Secondary College School District has done over 11% per annum. Absolutely shot the lights out. And yet we appraised a property in the Glen Waverley Secondary College School District for a client. They bought an off-the-plan one-bedroom apartment, I'm sorry to say, in the best performing suburb in Melbourne, and yet they had to sell it for less than they bought it for 12 years ago. You don't buy a suburb, you buy a property. You don't buy the property market, you buy a property. And that's why you shouldn't be focused on, is now the right time to buy? You should be focused on, is this the right property to buy? Now, Jason's question, unfortunately, many of us have made mistakes and have bought properties that have not done well and perhaps now starting to realise why they've not done well. Generally speaking, we like to give this analogy. If you're in a very slow train and you're watching the fast trains fly past, it's almost always a better idea to get off at the next station, walk over to the next platform and get on that fast train. Now, it takes time and money to get off the slow train, move over, get on the fast train. And in the short term, that means you'll be further behind financially. But within 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you'll be so far ahead of where you were if you'd stayed on that slow train. So, look, everyone's circumstance is different. Part of what will make that decision for you is how much debt versus equity you had in the loss-making property. So again, I'm not going to, there is no one-size-fits-all answer to any question about property, because it's about the individual property and it's about the individual client and their circumstances. But in most cases, there are usually opportunities to say, you know what, I'm going to take my medicine. If there's some golfers out there among you and you're in the rough, okay, I'm just going to chip onto the fairway, drop a shot, but then be in a good position to continue. And so in most cases, over the medium and long term, you'll have been far better off to get out of a poor performing property and get into a good performing property, even though that will be painful in the short term because it will cost you money and time and effort.
Beautiful. Thanks for that, Evan. Now we've got one more coming here through for Warwick. So Alex is wondering, there's such a buzz about buying properties in regional areas. What are your thoughts on regional versus metro areas?
Yeah, there is a buzz, obviously. COVID has obviously made regional a lot more of a buzz than what it has been in the past. As Evan said, you can buy good properties and bad properties everywhere, and you can buy properties in regional areas that perform. My current opinion is that COVID has pushed the price of regional properties up significantly, and whether or not we'll see the continued incline of growth from that market, because it may have been inflated as a result of people leaving Melbourne and leaving lockdowns. And we may also see that now that with COVID and all those different things and people kind of feeling a bit more comfortable and things getting a little bit back to normal, people who bought kind of holiday homes in regional areas kind of go, oh, it doesn't really suit me anymore. So they start selling them. We have noticed that it is getting a bit harder to sell properties in those areas, but they can perform, and it can be a bit of a budget-driven thing. So if you don't have a budget for metro and you can buy a good quality property in regional, then it can still work. But I do think that as a general rule, that it may be a little bit overpriced right now.
Beautiful. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I've got one more question here for Evan. So if you have a budget of, say, $1.5 million, should you use that to purchase one investment property at 1.5, or should you split the purchase and buy 2 properties instead?
Oh, look, that's a great question. And again, I can't answer you generically because the answer could be different depending on the circumstances of the person asking the question and what their objectives are, okay? So in some cases, for example, we might say to a client, look, you really want to get strong capital growth. That's how you're going to build the wealth. But getting that strong capital growth means your rental yields are not going to be so strong, and depending on how much money you need to borrow and what that's going to cost you, you may be a bit overstretched. But we can buy a high capital growth property for, say, $1 million, and then a smaller property that will generate good rental yield that will help you cover the costs of the high growth property so that the overall portfolio will perform well for you. But, you know, that's one of many possible answers to the question. There are benefits in diversification. You don't want all your eggs in one basket, generally speaking. But I would rather have one good property than 2 poor quality properties. There's something in the sort of property spruiker land and the aspirational marketing that somehow I own 5 properties. You know, I don't care how many properties you own. What matters is the quality of those properties. So, the specifics of your question would really depend. You know, I would likely buy one property in one market, like Melbourne, and another one somewhere else, like, say, Brisbane, to diversify my risk because they may perform in slightly different ways. Or I might buy one property with strong capital growth and one with a little more cash flow if that's what I need financially. Or I might just be able to make it really simple. There's one really good property that I can get for the whole $1.5 million. I know it's going to perform well. I don't need to think hard about it. I can do one good investment, set it and forget it and let it go. So I'm sorry I can't give you a simple one-size-fits-all answer, because the answer always depends on the needs and objectives of the individual client, the time frame for that client, we have clients who built wealth through property, but now they need cash flow as they go into retirement. So they might want to move from a high capital growth to a higher yielding property, or there are other ways of making things work. So, anybody who gives you one size fits all answers about anything about property is trying to sell you something, to be honest. If they're saying this is the greatest suburb, then they're trying to sell you something. If they're saying this is the perfect way to invest in property, they're trying to sell you something. If they're not listening to what you're trying to achieve, to what your family circumstances are, to what your financial situation is, to what your time frame is, then they're trying to sell you something. What we try and do is understand what our clients need, whether it's for a home or for an investment property, how their finances are structured, what their time frame is, what their family circumstances are, and which investment property I buy may be influenced by which home I own, because we should be thinking about the whole property portfolio. So there's no simple answer to that question. If you want a good answer, then it's a one-on-one discussion.
Thanks, Evan. Now, we have come to the end of our session, so I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for attending. We really hope that you've taken something valuable away from this webinar tonight. We do have a super quick 1 to 2 minute survey that we would really love if everyone could complete, just appearing on your screen now. But apart from that, we hope you all have a lovely evening and thank you for attending.